Conference on Kalinga and Southeast Asia, the civilizational linkages. Indeed, it is a great occasion to have in our midst eminent dignitaries, and I take the privilege to pronounce that the inaugural session is graced by esteemed chief guest of the morning, Dr. Binay Sahasrabuddhe, President, Indian Council for Cultural Relations, New Delhi. With a big round of applause, we welcome sir. And also, we are very much privileged to have in our midst esteemed guest of honor, Professor Santhisri Thadipadi Pandit, esteemed Vice Chancellor, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. And also, we are having the gracious presence of Dr. Chantham Thue, Deputy Director General, Institute of Culture and Fine Arts, Royal Academy of Cambodia. And this morning we are having the gracious presence of Professor Smriti Kumari Sarkar, former Vice Chancellor, Bardhaman University, West Bengal, who will be presenting the keynote address. And Dr. Chandi Prasad Nanda, Professor, School of Humanities, Gati Shakti Vishwavidyalaya and Chairman, One SF Foundation is with us. And Professor Upendra Pathi, esteemed Chairman of the conference and Director of IMS Utkal University is with us. I take the privilege to request all our dignitaries on the dais to kindly light the ceremonial lamp to mark the commencement of the second international conference on Kalinga and Southeast Asia, the civilizational linkages. It has been a tradition that every auspicious occasion commences with the lighting of the lamp, and this morning we are having this tradition, and I request all the dignitaries present over to kindly light the lamp and mark the commencement of second international conference on Kalinga and Southeast Asia. Esteemed guests of the morning are joined by Professor Patita Pavan Misra, the convener of the conference. We are extremely grateful to you, sir, for your benign presence. And now presenting Indian National Anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल गंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जय जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे।
Now, we express our heartfelt gratitude to all the dignitaries present over for their gracious presence, whose presence has added luster to this program. And I take the privilege to request Professor Upendra Pathee, Chairman of the Conference and Director of IMS, Utkal University, to kindly present saplings as a token of love and appreciation to the gracious presence of our esteemed dignitaries. And also presentation of the saplings, also marks offering back to the guests and the dais. Particularly, the inaugural ceremony witnesses your gracious presence, and we are extremely thankful to all of you. And with your gracious presence, this international conference, the second edition of International Conference on Kalinga and Southeast Asia, the civilizational linkages, is indeed a great occasion to remember in the days to come. And I take the privilege to request Professor Upendra Pathee, Chairman of the Conference and Director of IMS Utkal University, to kindly present the welcome address.
जय जगन्नाथ, नमस्कार, good morning. I welcome you all to the second edition of ICICH2023, the Kalinga Southeast Asia Civilizational Linkages International Conference, Bhubaneswar, Odisha. So we have with us our Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Binay Sahasrabudhe, the President, Indian Council of Cultural Relations, and esteemed guest of honor, Madam Professor Shantishri Dhulipudi Pandit, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. And we have with us our distinguished guest of honor, Professor Dr. Chantun Thuye, Deputy Director General, Institute of Royal Academy, Cambodia. And we have with us our distinguished esteemed speaker, the keynote speaker of this inaugural session, Professor Smriti Kumar Sarkar, former Vice Chancellor, Bardhaman University. Sir, we welcome you, sir, to this second edition of the International Conference of ICICH, to this session, sir, inaugural session. And we have with us the convener of this International Conference, Professor Dr. Patita Pavan Mishra, former Professor, Sambalpur University, and an eminent scholar on Southeast Asia. And we have with us Professor Dr. Chandi Prasad Nanda, the Dean and Department Head, Gati Shakti Vishwavidhyaya Central University, and also the Chairman of the One Asia Foundation with us. And esteemed guests and the scholars, I welcome you all to this second edition of the International Conference on Kalinga Southeast Asia Civilizational Linkages. We have many scholars, and it will take number of times to address them. Particularly, I can address, we have with us Dr. Bhajan Kumar, Professor Prakash Sadangi, Professor Udaynath Sahu, Professor Nishamani Kar, Professor Amiya Patnaik, and many more scholars from Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia, Professor Binoy Kumar Mishra. I welcome you all, along with all our delegates and participants, to this international conference. Friends, I am very happy to tell you all, we are passing this Amrit Kal. The India is celebrating the 75 years of the rich independence, the Amrit Kal we are all passing. Also, it is a privilege for all Indians. The country is leading G20 presidency under the able leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister. During this time, and we are planning to have this international conference here in Bhubaneswar. Friends, India today is exploring the lost cultural roots and missing links with the outside world, especially in the context of its profound cultural, historical, commercial relations with the countries around it for the last 2,500 years. Though it is lagging behind China in economic powers, it has the experience of guiding world in the intellectual, ideological, and cultural domains. Our Santhas and Mahantas and Bhikkhus have been the torchbearer and enlightened the world regarding India and its cultural heritage. On the eve of India holding the presidency from December 1st, 2022 to November 30, 2023 of G20, the premier objective now is to shape and strengthen global architecture and governance in all major international issues. As you all know, the theme of India's G20 presidency is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one future. The most important moral value of the Maha Upanishad, above the Vedantic thoughts, advocates the cause of holistic development and respect for all life forms, an extension of the ancient Indian concept. This idea of oneness, of being subscribed to harmony when many are restored to some unity. Despite all superficial diversity, our life in illusion must experience and endure the feeling of oneness through love brought about amongst all the nations, castes, colors, and the creeds. The people of Odisha, the ancient Kalinga, believes that for 2,800 years, these southeastern islands groups were close contact with the Kalinga people. Along with traffic, commodity exchange, there was also the ideological and cultural exchange between Kalinga and these island groups in the Kalinga Sagar. As stated, Jatra commemorates the rich maritime history of Odisha and its ancient trade affairs with Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka. So, in these 3 days international conference, we have invited scholars and the experts to deliberate these things during this conference. Particularly, on behalf of the organizing committee from the conference side, I invite and welcome the scholars from different countries, Southeast Asia like India, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Cambodia, Philippines, Laos, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka to attend this conference. They have also, keeping our request, they have also joined with us. Some of the scholars have agreed to join this conference, hybrid mode and virtual mode. and they will deliberate. Certainly, we will expect with your deliberations and exchange of ideas, the future of this international conference. You all will set the course of this international conference along with its future course of action. During these 3 days in conference, we have 5 plenary sessions focused on the history of India and Southeast Asia with special reference to Kalinga, the Indianization process, the literature, folklore, monuments, sports, and evidence of cultural linkages, archaeological excavations, and findings as evidence of commercial relations will be the focus of discussion during this conference. Also, trade and commerce and medieval modern India, Indian diaspora in Southeast Asia, the contemporary scenario, India's Act policy, East policy, look at East policy, geopolitics and Indo-Pacific region and the Asian Union. So these are the major areas where our invited scholars and the speakers and the session chairs will focus. I hope those you have joined with us, keeping lot of friends coming all the way to Bhubaneswar to join this conference. I hope you all will leave this conference with a very rich, memorable things to your own nation, to also with these ideas. And I hope your contribution and support will help us to take this journey ahead when we will plan for the 3rd edition of this international conference. And lastly, I welcome you to this 2nd international conference in Bhubaneswar. With these words, I thank you all and I pray Lord Jagannath to bless you all and for 3 days deliberation and stay over here in the temple city of Bhubaneswar. Jai Jagannath.
Professor Rupesh Pathi, esteemed chairman of the conference, director of IMS University, deserves commendation for his wonderful welcome address, and he has sought your cooperation and your participation in the 3-day-long 2nd international conference and all the deliberations, discussions, quite effective. And we extend a thank you to all of you for your presence. Indeed, the presence of great who have contributed to different in their respective fields, and their participation indeed has added luster and has added dynamism in this conference. And we are very much honored with the illustrious presence of Dr. Chandi Prasad Bandar, Professor School of Humanities, Representative College, and Chairman Bhubaneswar Foundation, as we know, as an alumni of Ravenshaw, after obtaining degree of graduation from Ravenshaw College, which is at present Ravenshaw University, Professor Nanda obtained his master's, MPhil and PhD degree from Center of Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University in the year 1996. His research interests span a variety of interdisciplinary subjects. He has been the recipient of prestigious international awards, grants and fellowships, including Leadership for Academicians program hosted by Harvard Graduate School of Education at the Cambridge campus of Harvard University, Boston, USA, and ICICH Kolkata in the year 2019 under sponsorship of Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India, and Aarhus University, Denmark, Global Research Grant 2019, Erasmus Mundus Interdisciplinary Bridges for Indo-European Studies Fellowship in the year 2015, Welcome Trust United Kingdom Grant in the year 2012 and Charles Fellowship in the year 2007. And he has participated in a research project of German Research Council and an international association project on the history of leprosy of Oxford, and he has also served as a visiting fellow and professor to a number of universities of international repute. Currently, he serves as professor at School of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences and Dean Administration in Gati Shakti Vishwavidyalaya, Gujarat, and he is also the chairman of One Asia Foundation. This morning, we are extremely grateful to his benign presence, and I take the privilege to request Dr. Chandi Prasad Nandaji to kindly present his opening remarks.
Namaskar, Jai Jagannath, and good morning. Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. B. Sahasrabuddheji, President, Indian Council of Cultural Relations, esteemed guest of honor, Professor Shanti Sri Dulpadi Pandit, Vice Chancellor, prestigious Jawaharlal Nehru University, Professor Chantun Thui, Deputy Director, General Institute of Culture and Fine Arts, Royal Academy of Cambodia, our keynote speaker and a long-time acquaintance and whom I adore as one of the top intellectuals of this country, Professor Smith Kumar Sarkar, former Vice Chancellor of one university, and my old colleague and also my, in many ways, my critical mentor, Professor Patita Pawan Mishra, former Professor, History, Sambalpur University, and convener of this conference, 3 days conference, and obviously Rupendra Padi, who doesn't need any introduction at this point of time, and I see him as one of the leading architects of this conference, without whom perhaps this moment to which we are speaking to would not have been possible. So it is Professor Padi. Distinguished guests, panelists, who would be joining the conference virtually in the upcoming sessions, delegates, attendees, members of print and digital media, ladies and gentlemen. So on behalf of Utkal University, Institute of Media Studies, and One Asia Foundation, I cordially welcome all of you to this historic, I emphasize historic, second edition of this 3-day international conference on Indian cultural heritage, which is called ICICH. And the theme, and you know, that is Kalinga, Southeast Asia Civilization Linkages, which is being organized for the next 2 days more, starting with today. So at the outset, I would also like to kindly draw your kind attention to the fact that the first international conference on Indian cultural heritage was organized in 2017, and this one today is 2023. So there is a gap of almost 6 years, and we are coming out of this pandemic phase. So I call this conference as historic, as it happening in the wake of post-pandemic times, and coincides particularly with a celebratory moment of India assuming G20 presidency, over and around a very interesting call for one earth, one family, and one future, to which Professor Padi was just now referring to. The conference is all about something which is premised around a futuristic call, as a kind of, what I see, that it's a kind of conceptual intervention. If you ask me what is the purpose and objective of this conference, so it's basically, I would see it as a kind of conceptual intervention to explore ways of recalibrating the global architecture and governance underlying the world order that we inhabit today. The theme as adopted for this conference is intended, maybe intended as an entry point to reflect on the question at a discursive level, while engaging with the theme on a more critical empirical registers. So as you look at the plenary sessions, the themes of these sessions have been well tailored out, and the proposed deliberations of the conference, as you may note, are, as has been already spelled out by Professor Padi, on themes like historiography, India, Southeast Asia, and this idea of Indianization is the theory, the debate around Indianization thesis is going to be reflected on, debated, revisited, and contested. Maybe also, some more arguments come in favor of it to bolster this argument. Similarly, we have literature, folklore, monuments, and ports as evidence of cultural linkages, and there is an archaeological dimension to it which needs to be also probed in. Trade and commerce in medieval modern India, obviously. Indian diaspora is another component, and most importantly, also coming to the contemporary phase, as we engage with the question of look-east policy, act-east policy. So we also try to reflect on what could be the possibility of engaging with the ways of doing geopolitics today. If some of the thoughts gets pulled out of this conference, and how do we work on this, how do we build on these arguments to redefine or remap this idea of geopolitics for the present context. So as you can see that the varied range of relationships from these five plenary sessions up, you can see these broad themes, and underlying this, there is a varied range of relationship between the people of Kalinga, the coastal region lying between Godavari and Mahanadi rivers, and obviously Southeast Asia, spanning over 2 millennia in a temporal scale, in a time scale, which has been richly documented. People doing history, anthropology, and also other forms of knowledge digging. When they look at these dimensions, they have empirically done a lot of research, a lot of ideas have been generated over the years on these questions. I mean, this looking at exploring the linkages between Kalinga and Southeast Asia. However, this relationship obviously arguably stretched beyond a very obvious traffic and commodity exchange to one that had deeper cultural and ideological orientations. This quintessential relationship was obviously, as you may remember, back in November 15th, 2022, from Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji made a very interesting reference to Katak Balijatra. So that reference in fact reinforced and evoked global appeal. Recently, when Modi ji, in this context of his participation in G20 summit at Bali, referred to this famous Balijatra that gets celebrated at Cuttack in Odisha as a great exemplar of thriving relationship between India and Indonesia. Perhaps I think this conference is coming out of that comment, that reference which was made, and maybe it was thought that it's interesting to get this whole idea again revisited from a different perspective, and if we can at least contribute to this thought structure in a different way. In fact, Balijatra commemorates this robust maritime history of Odisha and points to its trade and commercial engagement with Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka. Driven by the dynamics, as we today we get driven by the dynamics of globalization, and with hindsight, as we look back today in Kalinga, on Kalinga and India's profound historical, commercial, cultural connect with the world outside for more than 2000 years, there are several issues which comes to trouble us, and there are questions about how to strategically rethink. I emphasize we need to strategically rethink India's relationship today with Asia, including China, because as you know that this country has a different hyper-real existence. It's a hyper-real Europe in 19th century or 20th century, but 21st century, we often we encounter China in a hyper-real state. So it is hyper-real China which needs to be engaged in what way. So this is why we need to strategically rethink India's relationship with Asia, Southeast Asia, and the world at large. Obviously, all these questions merit deeper scrutiny in the light of hegemonic dominance of countries like China. More so, the problematic includes the question as to what could be the possible domains of forging and rebuilding these connections: intellectual, cultural, ideological, or commercial, or the mix of it. So how we try to build on all these connections, how to rethink these connections. I think one of the major focus of this conference is going to particularly chase this particular sub-theme, some of these underlying themes This is going to be a very most important focus of this conference. In fact, thinking through a theme like connected fast between India and Southeast Asia that informs the present we inhabit, and thereby configuring the dynamics of a time that was marked by an absence of discursive framework of modernity and its cognate concepts like civilization, politics, and nation states, perhaps tellingly call for a critical engagement of interplay of modes of representing past, memory, and history. Because the theme that we are looking at is a theme both temporally and spatially, is something away from modernity, away from the idea of civilization which got coined in 19th century, or the whole discursive framework of what you call post-enlightenment led idea of modernity, politics, and nation states. It was not there. So how do we look at these time and this space, these geographies, with all its connections, without keeping this category in mind, that something which was absolutely significantly missing, and how do we make sense of that is the major challenge, I think, that our deliberations have to take note of that. Mapping some of the understudied yet very nuanced nature of such cultural encounters and conversations between these spatial entities based on historiographic perspectives becomes an inescapable cause for revisiting a theme like Kalinga and Southeast Asia linkages that has drawn, let me tell you, very serious interventionist scholarly attention over the period. Besides, as you know that the ASEAN, the 3 decades of ASEAN, back in 1992 and this is 2022, these 3 decades of ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations. How do we celebrate this moment of 3 decades? So this conference can be seen as making a review of 30 years of ASEAN in many ways. Coming from a platform like this, we also take into account that how do we engage with this question of ASEAN in terms of the idea and efforts at bolstering a trans-regional interactions between these zones in the wake of the end of Cold War provides the other key focus, but one of the seminal focus of this conference. The conference, as has been noted in the concept note, aims at foregrounding context and perspectives that were critical to the development and adaptations of Indian culture in Southeast Asia, propelled by diverse nature of interactions and syncretism in the indigenous society and vice versa. This is a very obvious theme. Nobody can get out of that, that cultural exchange when you try to map. But beyond that, there are some of the issues, some of the concerns which are tangentially, which will touch upon the core theme of the conference, namely, how have the cultural connections between Kalinga and Southeast Asia been reaffirmed and reimagined over time through pre-modern trade, art, architecture, and other forms of socio-cultural interactions. I think this is one of these very interesting dimensions that we need to also make sense of. The thematic gauge of the conference seeks to acknowledge the subtle sub-regional diversities that sought to articulate autonomy and agency within what is often folded into the category of homogeneous, unified Southeast Asian identity. So we try to contest this. These deliberations in many ways may also try to problematize this, whether there is a unified Southeast Asian identity or there are also diversities, pluralities within. We need to look at them, engage with them, and we need to recognize them, whether it is a homogeneous category or it is a heterogeneous category, whether we need to look at Southeast Asia as one bulk product, or there are also components which we need to engage with differently. So, but at the same time, we recognize the disciplinary practices of exploring the history of Southeast Asia, quote unquote. History of Southeast Asia is homogeneous, but do we need to also contest this category? Need to question this category? These are the questions which we need also, the deliberation is going to look at. Southeast Asia, given its commonality underlying its parts in terms of its shared cultural markers, the claim to its geographical, ethnic, historical, linguistic, and political homogeneity has always been profoundly questioned and settled. Thus, it needs hardly any reiteration that ASEAN, as an entity like collective modern nation polities, illuminates thriving yet diverse socio-cultural and religious practices, even as it shares cultural values, historical links, challenges, and aspirations among its members as well as with India. So, broadly, it is in the fitness of this discourse, the conference aims at opening up ways of engaging with a dialogue that speaks to Kalinga and India's cultural interactions with different parts of Southeast Asia. So this conference is speaking to India and Kalinga's cultural interaction in many ways. So I once again welcome you to this historic meet. I call it historic meet. Maybe the numbers is going to increase as we pass on from this journey at this point of time. And earnestly hope that the upcoming deliberations in the conference will be productively engaging, triggering off a wide range of perspectives and a lot many trenchant critics on the theme to the extent of raising more questions to think through than resolved standalone answers to take away. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
We are extremely thankful to Dr. Chandi Prasad Nanda, Professor, School of Humanities, Gati Shakti Vishwavidyalaya and Chairman, One Asia Foundation, for his encouraging opening remarks. Now I take the privilege to request esteemed dignitaries in the dais to kindly release the commemorative monograph, first to be followed by the release of abstract booklets. So this international conference on its second edition witnesses a release of different books and monographs, and at the outset, the commemorative monograph is being released. The commemorative monograph released by our esteemed guest. It is followed by the release of abstracts booklet. We are extremely thankful and grateful to our dignitaries. Usually, seminars and conferences are marked by the presentation of keynote address, which gives a capsulated summary of the entire event in the session. And this morning in this international conference, we are having the motivating presence of Professor Smriti Kumar Sarkar, who will be presenting the keynote address. As we know, as a renowned historian of our time and Professor and former Vice Chancellor, Bardhaman University, West Bengal, he was also the Vice Chairman, the Board of Trustees, Indian Museum. And before joining Bardhaman University as Vice Chancellor, he was also the Professor of History, Kalyan University. And in his long career as an educationist and a Professor of History and Vice Chancellor, he has guided innumerable scholars, those who have been awarded, those who are awarded with PhD and elite degrees. Such an academician is with us, and that has added quite luster to this particular conference. I take the privilege to request esteemed Professor Smriti Kumar Sarkar to present the keynote address.
इसको थोड़ा पीछे कर दीजिए। Good morning to you all. My best regards to Dr. Binay Sahasrabudhe, President, ICCR, and Madam Pandit, Vice Chancellor, Jawaharlal Nehru University, my friend Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, whom I know since long time, my other friend on the other end, Professor Potit Pawan Mishra, and Professor Padhi, who has invited me to deliver this address. Thank you all. I consider myself privileged to be here, but I would like to start with a rather disappointing submission that don't consider me an expert of Southeast Asia. I don't know any language of this region, nor I have visited any part of it. I'm basically India-centric, and my presentation also will be from the perspective of India. Now, let us begin with the question, what is Southeast Asia to India? Or we could put it otherwise, what is India to Southeast Asia? Now, in 1964, George Coedes, who is called the unchallenged dean of classical Southeast Asian studies, he summed up his 50 years of research on Southeast Asia in a book which he named as The Indianized States of Southeast Asia. And he devoted this book to, I quote, further India, I repeat, further India, insofar as it was culturally dependent on India proper. So that gives us the main question. What is this dependence? Culturally speaking, Southeast Asia is characterized by deep traces of Indianization that occurred long ago. Importance of the Sanskrit element in the vocabulary of the language spoken there, the Indian origin of the alphabets with which those languages have been or still are written, the influence of Indian law and administrative organization, the persistence of certain Brahmanic traditions in countries even after their conversion to Islam or after their conversion to Sinhalese Buddhism, and the presence of ancient monuments which in architecture, sculptures are associated with arts of India and bear inscriptions in Sanskrit. To put it in a single construction, this is the expansion of Indian civilization. And this is a type of the expansion of Indian civilization that has been described by scholars engaged in the field as one of the outstanding events in the history of the world. And as you all know, I feel tempted to quote before this August gathering the famous lines by the French Indologist Sylvain Lévy. Mother of wisdom, India gave her mythology to her neighbors, who went to teach it to the whole world. Mother of law and philosophy, she gave to 3/4 of Asia a god, a religion, a doctrine, and art. She carried her sacred language, her literature, her institutions into Indonesia, to the limits of the known world. And from there, they spread back to Madagascar and perhaps to the coast of Africa. So, as you all know, the relations between India proper and Southeast Asia date back to prehistoric times. So we cannot date the beginning of this process, and the process in various shapes and constructions, it continued throughout the millenniums, and it still continues in various forms. Kalinga pioneered the shift to the east, which resulted in the movement of men, material, merchants, and monks, isms and ideas, followed by cultural constructs, which also involved other regions of India and several countries on the other side of the sea. Of the Indians, Kalinga were first to reach the Southeast Asia. So much so that in Malay, Cambodia, and many other parts, ethnic term Kaling became synonymous to the Indians in general. Even in epigraphic record of Indian immigrants, Kalinga head the list. So deep was the imprint of Kalinga on the civilizational psyche of some people of Southeast Asia that even after the gap of a millennia, when in the 14th century, a Thai prince monk came to India in search of the sacred relics, he first came to Kalinga Empire, Kalinga Kingdom. Now, explaining this push is problematic. The idea that the bloody war of Kalinga encouraged or rather generated this push has been contested by scholars that its effect was felt after 3 centuries. Or there are similar other theories that the Gupta military conquest in central India had a similar type of impact on the elite population of India, central India, who moved to Southeast Asia. Or there is also a theory of relating the Shoilendros of Southeast Asia with the Shoilo kings of Odisha, or the domain of Funan related to the Cambodia. But these theories have not been properly unanimously accepted by scholars. There is another important theory that comes most often in the discussion of India's relation with Southeast Asia, that the kingdoms that came in course of the long history and that came to be known as the Indian kingdoms have been described by Professor R.C. Majumdar as Hindu colonies. The point is, these states were never controlled by India, and none of these states came into existence as a result of military aggression from India. In fact, there was no military aggression except the brief Chola interlude. Even in the case of the Chola interlude, that did not result in a kind of political subjugation in Southeast Asia, which could often be compared with kingdom, Indian-dominated kingdom. So the point is, these Indian possessions or the Indianized states cannot be called colonies in the sense India was a British colony or Indonesia a Dutch. What kind of movement was all this? When Kalinga made a move, technological constraints made transoceanic crossing difficult. So, in the beginning, they must have therefore hopped up from land to land along the long coastline and from place to place along the long coastline when they moved without a definite destination. Those who are familiar with marine technology can compare this movement with the Harappa seal, where a boat was found and with a cage of crows. So that was the technology. In earlier times, people always migrated along the coastline for it was easier for them. And in the way, they continued the process of inhabiting the unmanned coastline around the bay. Professor Pari sent a very good map of Southeast Asia with the literature, with the invitation. So if you look at the map, you can see that way people from India could straightway reach up to Java. And after a small fording, they could go to Sumatra and Indonesia and other parts. Another important aspects of India-Southeast Asia Connect is etymology and linguistics. These are, I will refer to Filipino professor Juan R. Francisco describes India as the most important cultural resource of the past for the whole of Southeast Asia. Trade and traffic through the vast expanse of the seas brought to the Filipinos Sanskrit terms denoting natural phenomena, cosmic bodies. The most important point that he referred to, Philippines borrowed its earliest known system of writing from South Indian scripts through their development in Southeast Asia, particularly northern Sumatra. The numerals borrowed from Sanskrit began with 10,000, not below, began with 10,000. And it went up to several million, 100 million. While the local denominative terms continued at the lower level of transaction. What does it suggest? It suggests that Indian merchants were involved in bulk trade and in trade in precious metals, whereas the local trade was left to the local people. It was this spirit of adjustment that actually summarizes the entire contour of connectivity and cultural relationship. We'll come on this point a little later. Sanskrit inscriptions have been found in Champa, Borneo, and Java. Southeast Asian system of writing, obviously, I just mentioned, owed a lot to Sanskrit and South Indian scripts. Even today, I repeat, even today, one could thus easily recognize the common origin of the Mon, Burmese, Thai, Khmer, Cham, Javanese, and Balinese system of writing. The technical terms referring to the material world were borrowed from Sanskrit, so were grammatical particles, which stabilized the isolated native languages and enriched them and made them more flexible. Now, these are some of the aspects that everyone knows almost. And another thing before I go to a different aspect is obviously the art, sculpture, and monuments. And here, the best example is, of course, the Angkor Wat my friend from Cambodia was just telling this morning. The world's largest temple constructed by the great Cambodian king Suryavarman II, posthumously named as Parama Vishnu Loka. Now, in 1860, the French naturalist Alexander Henry Mohot, when he reinvented it after 200 years of oblivion in forest, he was simply surprised to see it. He remarked, quote, "This architectural work perhaps has not and perhaps never has had its equal in the place of the world. It is unequal." English literature, Sir Albert Sitwell, was simply awestruck when he first saw it. He said, "Let it be said immediately that Angkor as it stands ranks as the chief wonder of the world today, one of the summits to which the human heights has aspired in stone, infinitely more impressive, lovely, and as well as romantic than anything that can be seen in China, than even Great Wall and Ming tombs." And he emphasized, the only artistic influence ever to be detected in Angkor is Indian. You just imagine, this is, I can't go into the details, you just imagine that such a temple was constructed in a very lonely place, very far from the center of civilization at that time, by the people who were considered barbarian, ignorant barbarians. So these are some of the points that the whole the existing literature of historiography and the approach to history need to be revisited, need to be rewritten. And the famous scholar on art and architecture, Southeast Asian art and architecture, Reginald May, stressed that the entire influences came from India. And when you examine the masses of decorative carvings, the subjects are obviously derived in the main from Indian literary sources. Now, I find here many young scholars. For young scholars, I have an appeal that these, what I have said so far, are much known fact, but there are certain areas that are yet to be worked out. Do you know the nature of connectivity that can be perceived only from the viewpoint of technology? Take from agriculture. Agriculture, the latest techniques of agricultural research, paleobotany, pollen research, and archaeobotany, on the basis of which we see there is a wonderful relationship between the rice cultivation in Southeast Asia and the entire stretch of rice cultivation in India. How many of you know that rice, there are two varieties of rice internationally. One variety is called indica. One variety of rice is called indica. It is called indica because it was domesticated in the Indo-Gangetic Valley. And do you think that this was domesticated in the Indo-Gangetic Valley and before that there was no rice in India? Yes. Even before that, this is has been dated by the archaeobotanist at 6000 BC, the domestication of rice. But even before that, there are other varieties of rice. And two varieties of rice have been already identified. One is the Harappan rice, and other is the Nibara, Sanskrit term Nibara. Now, just I am telling you, my friends, those who are Eurocentric view of history, those who still believe that only the Europeans and the Western historians can write better history, for them I have a suggestion. Now this Nibara comes in the reference of Kalidas. The great poet Kalidas refers to Nibara. If there is any Sanskrit scholar here, just read Abhignana Shakuntalam. In Abhignana Shakuntalam, Kalidas giving a description of Mahorshi Karna's hermitage, ashram. Now he is describing that as you go, because he is directing other people, that as you go, Mahorshi ashram is surrounded by shrubs. And these shrubs are full of bird drops. And then he classifies the bird that Nibaro, the flocks of Nibaro eating birds. Because Nibaro was a wild variety of rice. So the birds carried the seeds of, they went through the naturalization, they carried. So the Nibaro has been referred to by Kalidas in 4th century. You know, Kalidas can be dated in 4th, 5th century AD. So this Nibaro was extensively cultivated in the wild form by the tribe. I will come to this point a little later. Now, this is one thing. Another is, if you connect this, you see the Indian pattern of rice cultivation. It starts from Northeast India, it's a wonderful field and wonderful subject. Historians should now divert your attention to this material aspect of history and how to connect these material aspects of history to cultural constructs, because it starts from Northeast India and it moves down the entire Ganges Valley, the present-day Bangladesh, the whole of West Bengal, Bihar, Odisha, Assam, and steep down from the Ganges to the Godavari Delta and further down, and then on the other side, the Malabar side, there is the Konkan region. This is the rice belt. The outside, the coastal side. And if you approach anthropologically from the tribal, what kind of rice they used to sow, before the domestication and the extension of rice cultivation. That's a different story. I don't want to digress. Sometime later I will tell you. This is one part. And the another aspect of understanding India-Southeast Asia Connect is the trade. Trade. I know what kind of boat they used. The boat that they used, the hull, they needed something to stabilize it in the turbulent sea. The stabilizing boat needed some natural genius. And this paddy, rice, was a stabilizing factor. This is a very interesting area of study, but just I'm referring to these things only to suggest that how there was an interconnect between these extremely important grain, cereal, that brought about a tremendous boost to our population growth on both sides of the seas, and that changed the culture. I have written in my book that the entire Eastern India, up to Northeast India, is dominated by the Bhat culture. Bhat culture, the rice culture. So the cultural construct came little later, and the culture based on rice starts from plantation, husking, and selling, everything. It's a wonderful story. And the next is, one of the earlier name of India was Jambudipa. Jambudipa. Now the term Jambudipa comes from Jamun, Jambu. If you go to any botany expert, this is endemic to India. Jamun is a fruit that was originally grown in Indian subcontinent only. So it was transplanted to other parts of the sea, particularly Southeast Asia and some other Maldives and other things, where these things reached through Indian connectivity. So there are similar many other botanic items that freely moved from this side and that side, and you cannot date them, their movement. But I will end this story with another product, paper. Paper. Paper is the most powerful Indian grain. This is original to Malabar. And you know how the entire history of India, the cultural history of India, the commercial history of India was shaped by this one thing, paper. And this paper also traveled to Southeast Asia from Malabar. There are other things, very other things which I am working on, and I will tell you later. But now I will try to contemporize. My friend Professor Chandi Prasad has already situated this conference to the present day concerns of India. Now I will just point out to some other things, how to contemporize the issues. 3 issues that emerge in my mind relate this conference to our contemporary India in a very way. Now, the most important perspective is the Indian Ocean, or Indo-Pacific, to use the most recent construction. Now, historically, India holds a central position in Indian Ocean, and it is described as the halfway home, because right from the beginning of the civilization, no movement of the east-west ship was possible without touching upon India. And this is naturally ordained. How is it naturally ordained? I will tell you now. And I'm talking of a time when there was no magnetic compass. Because magnetic compass reached India only in the 18th century with the Europeans. And when there was no satellite. And even the sense of latitudes and longitudes are non-existing. So the entire voyage, the journey of the seas, was dependent on three things. First, the oceanic currents. Second, the wind flow. Third, the observation of the sky. Price was the most important issue. Now, India was privileged to have a long coastline, an entire coastline from the Ganges Delta, Godavari to Godavari, at the tip of, and then from Malabar up to Cambay, the entire coastline was dotted with very competent marine worthy people. And I'm not giving you just an imaginary story. All these marine worthy people have been repeatedly referred to in old documents. Unfortunately, we only depend on Eurocentric text. That's why we are deprived of this knowledge. I can't give you all the references, but from explorer Marco Polo, Chinese mariner diplomat Ma Huan, who came in early 15th century, to geographer Suleiman Mahari, everyone has referred to the Chola pilot. Chola pilot and the Chola sea charts. This is a very important thing. Unfortunately, we are yet to find any written text on the Chola sea charts. But there are indirect references in foreign sources, not in cock and bull story. Now, the frequency of their voyage to Southeast Asia points to their familiarity of oceanic currents. Am I taking too long time? Oceanic currents. Now, oceanic currents, flow to the same direction with a certain velocity which depend on the wind speed. In the season, powerful monsoon winds make the ocean currents more forceful, which help the ship sail faster to the direction of the wind. Unlike Europe, where voyage in and voyage out was possible throughout the year, in Indian waters, nobody dared to move into the sea without the season. Now, there are two, naturally dominating determinants of oceanic journey in those days. One is southwest monsoon. The southwest monsoon pushed all vessels sailing from East African Horn straight to India. Anything, any ship, if it starts from the South African Horn, it will naturally come to India. There is no else, because the current is like this. And the other north equatorial current originating from Banda and Java seas makes the navigator steer quickly from Sumatra to India and Sri Lanka. So that's why I am telling you that India is the halfway house. It is naturally ordained to be at the center and just in the center of the international navigation right from the beginning of the history of the navigation. Now, the seasonality of the oceanic wind often enforced a pattern of trade. This is another aspect of the relationship. What kind of trade was this? Just one or two examples. Chinese junk, for instance. These are called junk because these are heavy compared to Arabic dhao or Indian ships. Chinese junks, they could not move beyond India to West Asia, Red Sea, or the Red Sea or the Persian Ocean, Persian Bay, in one go, in one monsoon. So they had to make a break. The Chinese junk didn't usually move beyond Indian point. Similarly, the Arabic though, they also didn't or could not reach Sumatra, Malay or Malacca in one go. So they had to also break the journey. Now there are different locations. The Chinese usually stopped at, the early port was Quilon, and the later version was Calicut. So the tip of India, They didn't move out. And the Arabic, though, they rested in the out of season, they rested at the Malabar. Similarly, Indians who went from the Kolingo coast or Godavari or Coromandel to Southeast Asia, they took the return wind to reach India. They could reach in one monsoon. So it was this naturally constrained, naturally forced advantage for India that paved the way for civilizational connect between India and Southeast Asia. And it was a civilizational connect that was both material and cultural. And how the cultural constructs developed. I am not talking of the political states in the Western sense of the term. I never conceive history from the narrow Western nation states concept. That is bogus. Because the concept of nation, when it emerged in Europe, the kind of solidarity, the kind of cohesion existed in Asia, not only in India, in Asia, different parts of Asia, long since. So there is similarly, this is a colonial, imperialistic approach to restrain Indian imagination in this narrow sense and create the divisionism within. What could be the second important contemporary perspective? It is certainly China. Chandi was referring to China. Now the first point, you see, China lagged behind India in civilizing move in Southeast Asia. Why? Why the countries in proximity to China, having commercial relationship with them, prior to Indians stepped in there, were only marginally influenced by China. Why? Because China always sent its military first to conquer the territory and then sent its officials to spread their civilization, to spread their culture. So an invisible line, even in Indochina you see, historically, an invisible line along the Vietnamese mountain range of Gyai Tarung Son, which runs down the spine of Annam, historically separated the sphere of Indian and Chinese influences. So this is the difference. The difference is that China always depended on military endeavor, and India never used the military means to spread its cultural influence. So what India achieved in Southeast Asia was a slow process of cultural penetration. It was a slow and unnoticed process and done in peace with love. And it was always a sort of adjustment that it was a mix, it was a blending of the Indian contents and the local contents. There are similar, wonderful, the textiles, the dye, the use of natural dye. There are similar, wonderful examples, not just the examples that have been cited already from the cultural. These are the material, blending, the kind of blending. As a result, far from being destroyed by conquerors, the native people of Southeast Asia found in Indian society, transplanted and modified a framework within which their own society could be integrated and developed. George Coates thus continued, the Indian kingdoms that were set up in further India during the first centuries of the Christian era had only ties of tradition with the dynasties reigning in India proper. And there was no political dependence. And there was no political control. Whereas classical China considered Southeast Asian people as, quote unquote, southern barbarians, and demanded them to acknowledge the Chinese suzerainty by regular payment of tribute. Unlike parts of Vietnam conquered and administered by the Chinese, the Indianized kingdom of Southeast Asia were ruled by the kings of local origin who were advised by Indian counselors primarily in cultural matters. So the Chinese civilization did not spread beyond the area of our military conquest, whereas penetration of Indian civilization in Southeast Asia spread far beyond the boundaries of Indianized states. And what is important to note is that these influences did not even restrain, rather did not end into the Southeast Asian shores only. It traveled to China, it traveled to Japan, and it traveled to Korea. To return to the point of the, very recently, all of you must have read very recently a communique from Chinese foreign desk stated that Indian Ocean, I quote, Indian Ocean is not India's ocean. This is a very frank confession of their own position on the China Sea. Similarly, the China Sea is also not the Chinese Sea. To return to the point, just one example, because the Chinese are often jealous why this huge ocean is called the Indian Ocean and how to justify the Indian influence on this. Unfortunately, this influence, this Indian domination of the Indian Ocean is historically constrained. I'm giving you one example. If you read the European text, Eurocentric view of Europe history stated that the southwest monsoon was discovered by Roman navigator Hippolus in the first Christian era. But the same Roman sources states, 2-3 sources state that Hippolus' ship was directed to India, piloted by an Indian sailor. There is a very interesting story of this Indian sailor whose ship was shipwrecked on the Red Sea. He got arrested by the Egyptians, the army of the Egyptian king, taken to the Egyptian court, and he begged his freedom on condition that he will take Hippolus' ship to India. And all of you know that Vasco da Gama's ship was piloted by a Gujarati sailor. As a Bengali merchant ship brought the English to Balasore. So there are very, very interesting evidence in contemporary sources that our research scholars don't see, and that's why they don't surface to literature. Finally, a reference to the most talked about issue could be related to a theme like this today's conference theme. Yes, in November last year, EPW publication warned the Indians, I quote, the attempt to saffronize Indian history. The author explained, I quote, attempting to reconstruct and rewrite India's history is not a new endeavor. Hindu historians undertook a similar nationalist project almost 100 years ago to write history through a new lens. It was a political project which aimed to trace India's influence on the art and culture of other countries outside the subcontinent. The discussion added further that the primary intent of the society was to study and explore the history of ancient India and its connection with Southeast Asian nations like Thailand, Indonesia, and Cambodia. This came in November issue, last year, November issue. You can read. The title of the article is Greater India, or Greater India Society, something like this. Now, what he referred to was the Greater India Society founded by a Calcutta group of intellectuals in 1926. Their aim was to revisit India's history in view of the latest researches in India's glorious role in Southeast Asia. Revisiting India's rich heritage, they believed, would help promote the spirit of nationalism, contemporary nationalism in India, an India-centric approach of Indian history for the dominant Eurocentric view was their second objective. Now, what the author ignored, that the Indianized states of Southeast Asia did not depend on the Hindu historians to write their history of. And as you all know, I'm not going to repeat. British historiography did not recognize the role of India in the civilizational transformation of Southeast Asia, which the French and Dutch scholars explored first time in the early 20th century. The Calcutta group referred to by the EPW author included people who learned French and Dutch languages, studied in Paris and Leiden universities, and got an exposure to new researches in Southeast Asia's India Connect, done in France, Holland, and Java. Justifiably, they were proud of India's achievements in the past. Hence, back home, they considered it their duty to tell their countrymen of the glories of their countries in the past. Very recently, another perspective how secularism comes in. Very recently, political overtones, as you know, all know, sometimes confuse, if not blur, the real tenor of secularism. In contemporary India, you must be all aware of, in contemporary India, a section of Buddhist religious leaders has been trying their best to breach Buddhism's umbilical relationship with Hinduism. I can't go into the details. This is very much in the news. This reminds me of the Sanskrit inscription at Kelurak in 782 CE of Central Java, which manifests syncretism with Hindu cult, Buddhist syncretism with Hindu cults. Later, the same trait became clear in the Angkor Wat in Cambodia and finally developed into great Shiva Buddha cult of Central Java. I am just keen to know from my Southeast Asian friends who are present here, what is presently going on in Southeast Asia? Are they also thinking of parting their ways in a similar way, as some politically minded religious leaders are insisting on here in our country? Before I conclude, just 2-3 minutes, with an important query. Was it just a one-way traffic? The India-Southeast Asia Connect, was it just a one-way flow that India only offered to the people of Southeast Asia and received nothing in return? Such a proposition from the anthropological point of view, from ethnical point of view, is difficult to sustain. And I will take you a very unique theory in this, just a minute. French anthropologist Marcel Mauss studied the forms of exchange among archaic societies of Mexico. He argued that when two archaic societies, old society, old as a primitive society, primordial societies, when two archaic societies for the first time met each other, they opposed each other. They quarreled with them, they fought with them. But later on, the early opposition subsided to gestures, friendly gestures of getting in touch with them, having relationship with them. And this is followed by a third stage that the French author has defined as prestation and contre-prestation. That is gift and counter-gift. Gift and counter-gift. What they exchanged was not just their material products. What they exchanged was not just their fruits and other agricultural products. They exchanged their niceties, the cultural niceties, their culinary styles, and the most important, their tools and technologies. So it is this technological exchange that took place between two sides of the sea. And that chapter is yet to be written. Thank you very much.
The keynote address was quite refreshing, and we are extremely grateful to Professor Smriti Kumar Sarkar, former Vice Chancellor, Bardhaman University, and a renowned academician of our time, who just presented the keynote address quoting Abhigyana Shakuntalam by Mahakavi Kalidas. Adyepi kushumang prasuti samaye jasya bhavetyushchavaha swayam jati sakuntalah patigruhe sarve anugyayatam. We are extremely grateful to you, Shah, for your scholarly address, for your erudition, and for your gift of the gab. And now we are all eagerly awaiting to listen to the guest of honor of the occasion, Dr. Shantam Thue, Deputy Director General, Institute of Culture and Fine Arts, Royal Academy of Cambodia. As we know, his passion in cultural study, history and archaeology just made him reach such a great height. And Thue studied in Faculty of Archaeology, Royal Universities of Fine Arts and Faculty of Social Science. And he was the first Cambodian student to work with international research team at Angkor Wat for restoration and conservation. In 2009, he got a doctoral degree in archaeology at the Royal Academy of Cambodia with a supporting research grant by Southeast Asian Studies Regional Exchange Program, Council in Manila, Philippines, and Sandwich Scholarship to Germany. Dr. Thue Chanton has been appointed as a lecturer by UNESCO in the year 2002 to teach prehistory of Faculty of Archaeology, Royal Universities, Fine Arts. And to his credit, he has published so many books which are avidly read, which are largely read and appreciated by the scholars and the reading public of the world. May I request you, sir, to kindly address the congregation.
So, let's say good afternoon. Namaskar. And I should say, depend on my time, I should say it's good morning. And Arun Susday, Arun Swasti. Namaskar. We have the same. We have the same. So therefore, I'm Cambodian. I'm the Indianization state, one of the countries from India. From where? From where? The first Indianization, first civilization which my ancestor received from you. Where? Is it New Delhi? Is it Kolkata? Is it Manipur? Or is it where? Yesterday, I was very shocked. So, thank you, Professor Prandi. Thank you, my friend, elder friend, Bhajan Kumar, who's recommend me here. Why I get in shock yesterday? Because I see the Pura. What is it, Pura? It's Borai. What is it, Borai? It is city. My civilization, it's my civilization, we use the same term, we use the same word, it's Borai, it's city. So, why I get shocked? Why I get surprised to see Galinga? Who's Galinga? Galinga in Khmer, in Angkor civilization, you know, Galinga is Klang. Klang, who's that Klang? That Indian. that where the civilization of my country received from, or getting my ancestor received the civilization, most probably Kalinga, most probably Odessa. It's great Jagannath temple. Jagannath temple, it's really my impression. Why? My background is archaeology and history. What is it? I'm not only focused very old thing or very old stuff, but I quite interested with economic and cultural development and all of trade along the coastline. Bay of Bengal play very important civilization, trade, culture, political, and all of these things it goes through by the Bay of Bengal. Okay, probably most of you have seen already Angkor Wat. Thank you very much, Professor Vanay Shaharabudi, the president of the ICCO. He's already visited the Angkor several times. Professor, already the guest honor and president here stay on the stage. It's already see Angkor. What is it, the Angkor Wat? Therefore, I say Jagannath and Angkor, it's most probably the same structure of the civilization, same structure of construction, same structure of architectural building. So, how they build the temple? How they build the Jagannath? Yesterday I received a very good book from Professor Bachan Kumar, and today I received very good book too, Kalinga, Southeast Asia. This is very important. Why? Because our Asian people or Southeast Asia or South Asia people, we was in colonized long time by Western people. In India, most of scholars British, Hollandese, or I say European. In my countries, my part, it's by French. British and French, they're not together. Therefore, I learned from French. All document is French. They say something. I'm very happy to hear that Professor is just speaking about Surya Varman, Jaivarman II. Where are they from? Where they learn from? They start to erect Angkor Wat. A lot of rumor, they said, oh, Jaivarman II established Angkor Empire from Java. Some they said, oh, from India. Some they said, oh, from some part in Thailand. And some they said, oh, local king, local noble, let's become king in the country. This very interesting to find the source. Yesterday I arrived here, I suppose my ancestor probably came here, study from here. From where? From Kalinga. Why? How do I know? Just only first day, because I see technology. The temples erected by the elite, not by the God. The temple erected by the king. Same Angkor Wat, erected or built it by the king. But where these king or these elite people or royal family where they study, of course, I said the Bengal Bay play important role. How they traveling? They go by the sea coast. How do I know? Previous speaker just say about Okai culture, about Funan culture. The civilization not just starting when you see the building of Angkor Wat or you just see Jagannath temple. The civilization starts in early time. Important seaport right now, Okai culture of Funan culture, my civilization, first capital city, they call Funan, then Chenla, then Angkor, yeah, and keep Angkor till today. The Khmer people, Cambodian people, we used to call Cambodian or Khmer. First civilization start since even before century AD. From how the emerged the state or country of Khmer because of trade road. The seaport keep existing today, but today, you know, the movement of land and population, Vietnam invade Vietnam, swallow one Hindu country of Cham. Most of you know already the history, swallow, and now Vietnam took half of Cambodia because of the colonial and population pressure coming like this. And Funan culture at lower edge of mainland Southeast Asia, the seaport of Funan, we call Okai, still exists today. But the capital city is still in Khmer land in Cambodia till today. Okai, it's in Vietnam today, it's South Cambodia, we call Campuchia Krom, and capital city still in Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Huge canal was built, big canal. The wide of canal probably 200 meters, and the length of canal almost like 60 kilometers. The port, city port, and the capital, it's almost like 70 kilometers away from the sea. That the Funan culture, the palace, the trace of palace and city wall still exists till today. And who's the Indianization first king that traveling or made trade or made connection to that areas? More probably in Asoka period. So when we say Asoka period, probably the Asoka is not from Kalinga, Asoka from somewhere and invade here. And this morning we just talking about a bit about this civilization Asoka in Southeast Asia. So coming back, then my papers going to present probably tomorrow, talking about technology, how the Indianization, how Cambodian scholar or elite, I mean in Angkor period, they bring technologies here to build Angkor Wat. I will show you about the iron and stone and technology, how they erect the temple. Southeast Asia, most probably all of you know already. Borobudur, Brahmanan, Cebu, and on the coastline, this one, and come to Myanmar, further to temple in the river Irrawaddy, was then early culture civilization built by the bridge. There's a lot of temple built by bridge. And then as well, the sculpture, the god and goddess, it's not my face, it's not Cambodian face, it's long nose and with mustache. And who's that? Who's that? Therefore, I myself, I believe that from India, most probably from Galinga, where there is the shock of Indianization to my country. So, this trip is really great opportunity for me to tell my students, to tell my scholar, to tell my people that I've been to Galinga. I see the early civilization, it must be from Galinga. So our ancestor, our king, not from Java, not from Malay, most probably from here. Why? Why? Because I see their technology. Before I come here, I read book, a lot of book I'm reading, and do teaching as well. I believe only French. Why? Because of documented French. I never read much about Galinga here because, of course, like my introduction is French and British like this. French, they produce a lot of document. They control my country's 100 years, almost 100 years. They took a lot of artifacts and so and so. Therefore, from today on, we are the local. We are India, we are Cambodia, we are Malaysia, we are Filipino, we are Vietnamese, we are Cham, no, we are Singaporean. We are together. We study our Indianization. We study our region culture together. There's no place to block between Southeast Asia and India. Now open door very much. Not only archaeology, not only history, not only the civilization. There's a lot to have to study. Therefore, I'm encourage the young scholar, do continue, work hard. That's not difficult right now. Before we could not say, we could not open mind very much because we are under the block east and west and so and so. The scholar could not come together as well. Right now, the time for our Asian population, time for Asian civilization to ourselves. Not the time of colonize anymore. So, my conclude, Southeast Asia depend on ourselves. Southeast Asia depend on you. It's not British, it's not French, it's not European anymore. So, I hope, I'm looking forward to seek further cooperation between Southeast Asia more, not only the ancient time, ancient civilization, as well modern civilization, as well the tourists. Yeah, this we should do together. Thank you for your attention.
Indeed, we are short of words to express our heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Chantam Thue, the DDG, Institute of Culture and Fine Arts, Royal Academy of Cambodia, who has very widely elaborated on the linkages, civilizational linkages between Kalinga and Southeast Asian countries. And we are extremely grateful to the benign presence of our guest of honor, Professor Santishri Dhalipati Pandit. As you know, born at Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, Russia, the former USSR, Professor Pandit was educated in Chennai at the Presidency College, completed MPhil and PhD in International Politics from the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, postdoctorate in Peace and Conflict Studies from the Uppsala University, Sweden. She was appointed as the first woman and alumnus Vice Chancellor of India's top university, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and she joined on 7th February 2022 for a period of 5 years. Teaching and research career spanning over 3.5 decades, commencing with lecturer at Goa University and later in the University of Pune, now at Pune University, and previously professor in the Department of Politics and Public Administration, holding the additional charge of Director International Center since 2001 to 2007. And to her credit, she has published 4 books and edited 2 and had published several research papers, and she has widely traveled as well. And President of India has nominated her to several central universities as her nominee on selection committee, and for her remarkable contribution to higher education, she has been awarded with different accolades, which include Youth Forum for Gandhian Studies, Chennai Women Educator Award in 2003, Wise Text Award for Women Leaders in the Next Decade Education 2004, Veer Savarkar Award for Education Field, Srimati Susama Swaraj Stri Shakti Award in 2022, Universal Peace Federation Ambassador of Peace Award 2022, Deen Dayal Upadhyaya Award 2022, to name a few. We are very much honored with her gracious presence. May I request you, Madam, to kindly address the congregation.
నమస్కార్ ఎల్లార్కుం వణక్కం అందరూ మహానుభావులకి నా శతకోటి నమస్కారాలు వందనాలు. గుడ్ మార్నింగ్ టు ఆల్ ఆఫ్ యూ. లెట్ మీ అట్ ది అవుట్సెట్ థ్యాంక్ both the Utkal University and the other organizers for inviting me. The experts have spoken, so they've made my job much easier. Respected Chief Guest Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudheji and Dr. Chandran Thu, and we have our historian who made a brilliant presentation, Smriti Kumar Sarkar, and Patik Paban Mishra ji, and then we have Mrityunjay Rath, Chandi Prasad Nanda, Doctor, you are an alumnus of JNU, and we are very proud of you, and Bhupendra Phadi, and all the scholars gathered here, ladies and gentlemen, and dear students. The issue that I want to raise here is we have come to speak on Kalinga and Southeast Asia, the civilizational linkages. The issue raised is India a nation state or a civilization state? I would rather go with a civilization state, because if you see, both China and India are the only civilization states to enter the 4th industrial revolution. No other civilization anywhere in the world has this continuity with change, tradition with modernity, or realm with region. This is my first point to make, that don't analyze India from the narrow binary Western frameworks. They are good. I'm not saying they are bad. They have done good work. They do it from their own perspective. Because most of them come to India or don't come to India and still write books on India, like Max Muller. Or you have people who come and write on India's cast like Wendy Doniger, without even understanding our complexity. We don't see the world in black and white. We have shades of gray. We are not binaries. We see the world in concentric circles. It is not either or all. It can be everything together. So if you see the same with Southeast Asia, so we get misrepresented or we are wrongly understood. And I would also say that a time has come that large chunks of history have been blacked out and marginalized. And one such is the Kalinga period. Many of us don't see it in any of the textbooks. How much of the Kalinga period is there? Meaning, I asked somebody who ruled Kalinga when Ashoka attacked. Nobody knows the name of the king. Then was it a republic? Then are our democratic traditions as old as 261 BC? Nobody has an answer. So I would rather tell scholars like you who have the advantage of knowing Odia as well as English to go into these and try to bring new narratives. And this is very, very important. And if we see also there have been lot of institutional linkages. Another point I want to make here is that the Andhras, the Cholas, the Pallavas, all the maritime empire, India is made to look like a land part. As a centric history. If you read NCERT textbooks, which we are now, I hope, making a change, but many people are alleging so many things. We are only filling up gaps. I who come from Tamil Nadu feel very marginalized by that history. Because I never knew Mughals were defeated by the Ahom dynasty for 17 times. And I'm a student of history. I got my degree in history, BA history. And that's the level at which we teach our histories. And my university has been very good at it. Because for them, interpretations are sacred. Facts can vary. Whereas the definition of history by H. Carr is facts are sacred, interpretations can vary. And I think it is high time. And after 2014, there has been a shift. I don't think the electoral victory is there, the political climate is there, but the intellectual ecosystem needs to develop. And this is extremely important because history cannot be sacrificed at the altar of political calculations. And this has happened where you have erased even Kalinga history. Here I would like to make certain points. What was also made by our Cambodian friend, that there is architectural similarity between the Angkor Wat and the temples in Odisha or Kalinga. Has anybody done deep study? Do we even mention it in any of our textbooks? Or even the idea of ritual-political diplomacy. See, these kings, Kalinga, Chola, everybody did not follow the route of rape, plunder, genocide, which we think should normalize. They had political, it was trade, commerce, and culture. So if you see that, we have to also bring this alternative paradigm of how the influence took place in Southeast Asia. And the other is shipbuilding industry. I think when the Europeans and the Americans did or making stones, we had such, civilizations had technology which was so good because not only it went with the wind, not only they had a war armada, but also trading ships. So it was soft power with hard power and hence smart power. So are we trying to change these narratives? The other issue I would basically like to raise with most of you is that we are having strategic silence and whitewashing of history. Acrimony to the present, which identifies the invader as the victor, We have named most of our places after the name of him, the conqueror and the victor, not with the names of our great kings and dynasties. And I would like that this has to be changed, because the myth of defeated societies has to go away. We are not taught what we have won. We are taught what we have lost. And hence, this type of mentality needs to be changed, and I think this is a good opportunity. The topic is very good. I think scholars have to make paradigm shifts, not create goals, no compromise on facts, and this is very important. And I would only end by saying that the maritime history of Orissa and its significance to India's foreign policy is extraordinarily important. As the Prime Minister himself highlighted the Bali Yatra during the address to the Indian diaspora in Bali on the sidelines of the G20 summit, these roots and these narratives have to be brought back. And please remember that not only did India create an alternative trade route and brought in the importance of capturing islands and also the land route to the Isthmus of Kara and the Gulf of Siam, which we did with the Angkor kings. Do most of you know that both Suryavarman I donated his chariot with which he defeated many kings in Southeast Asia to Rajendra Chola? And so did Suryavarman II. So they gave each other gifts. And do you know, in Nagapatnam, there was a Buddhist vihara built in honor of these kings, and they built temples. That is why I call it ritual political diplomacy. And here we have to remember that Balinese Hinduism. I think another thing Hindu is, if Christian can be secular, Muslim can be secular, everything else is secular except Hindu. Hindu is not a religion, it's a way of life. Buddhist also. My question is, it's a geographical term that comes from the Hind Mahasagar. And if you know, it is not the name later given by the Arab traders, but first it was found in the Vishnu Purana. If you read it, Vishnu Purana says the land between the Himalayas and the Hind Sagar. So why are we so, shy and reluctant? Is it out of ignorance or an inferiority complex? So my question is, historians have a great duty as well as intellectuals, and I would say that the way forward is that Odisha's Kalinga heritage holds immense significance in India's cultural diplomacy to its relationship with Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka. Recently, the Sri Lankan president was in India, and if we want to have better relations with Sri Lanka, it is the cultural relations. The Sinhalas claim their origins from Kalinga or Odisha. By celebrating events like Bali Yatra, India renews its commitments to fostering cultural exchanges, trade partnerships, and diplomatic relations with Southeast Asian nations, bolstering the spirit of cooperation and collaboration in the region. Policymakers need to take a keen interest in promoting and creating awareness of the ancient maritime heritage among the public, especially I hope in the new curriculum framework we are bringing in. Do most of you know that the Marathas also had excellent naval power? We don't know that. Kanoji Angre, most of us don't even know and see the forts at Jaljira or anywhere in the coast. Do you know they are hidden when there is high tide and they come up late? So this is also an architecture. And I think this we have a long way to learn, and especially recognizing and promoting Kalinga's maritime heritage can significantly contribute to India's cultural ties with Southeast Asia and its cultural diplomacy in the Act East policy of our Prime Minister. The promotion of Kalinga's heritage can attract heritage tourism to the region, boosting the local economy and cultural exchanges. I would request all of you that locally we should make these, especially you have some of the most wonderful temples, especially the Sun Temple. And this temple, I was told that the sun literally was suspended by magnets. Somebody showed me a 3D. So I think all this technology need to be brought out. And by exploring and documenting and educating this heritage, we can bridge the gap of ignorance and foster stronger cultural ties, benefiting the present and future generations. And I think this is extraordinarily important. I agree that all these history has a main problem that time is an insurmountable wonder which has consigned entire phases of human past to oblivion. Lack of material evidence, absence of written sources, disappearance of oral histories and memories may conspire to push stretches of the human past to the dark ages or create gaps or breaks. Legends and myths that comply with or resist power structure evolve out of combinations of myriad life streams and innumerable tales of generations. Such narratives may further stifle and diffuse evidence, relegating unfathomable depth to oblivion. The illuminations of research would be disjointed, even fail to reckon. So I would agree that there are issues, but still there are scholars, as Professor Sarkar rightly said, if scholars do think out of the box and do look into new evidences. I'm not again saying that Western sources are bad. I'm only saying is, don't think they are the only sources and the last word in writing historiography. I think Indian women historians should write her story rather than his story, and that will greatly change the way because I think India is a great feminist civilization. Feminism did not begin with Karl Marx. It began with our goddesses. Who are the most powerful goddesses in Indira's cabinet? You all know it. Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge. You have Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth. And you have Parvati or Durga, the goddess of power. Today, you all quote Michael Foucault because it's fashionable. What did he say? Power is knowledge. We said it long back. And it is with women. And I would call Draupadi the first feminist, Sita the first single mother, and Kannagi as the first citizen activist. And I request all of us, we need to create these narratives at the university systems. Universities need to construct narratives, ecosystems that will help the resurgence of this civilizational linkage and restructuring the architecture of India as a civilization state. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Indeed, we are short of words to express our gratitude, our deep reverence to the guest of honor, Professor Santisri Panditji, esteemed Vice Chancellor of Jawaharlal Nehru University, for her scholarly, for her erudite address, and rightly syndicated the maritime history of Odisha, which reveals our linkage with the Southeast Asia, and that has been reflected in the stanzas of so many poets. And if I quote one of the poems, it will be quite befitting one. Amo Odisar sadhava boita bahu thile javha Sumatra parjanta दरिया बुकुरे बोईत भसाई अपार संपद आणुथिले बोही बोईत बंदाउ थिले कुलबधु आका मा बई नाम रहिला आमे सही ओडिसार पिला जो ओडिसार देश विदेश रे दरिया से पारे बेपार थिला. These lines establish the fact that how Kalinga had a strong link with the Southeast Asian countries, and that has been revealed by the scholarly address of Madam Professor Santisri Panditji. We are extremely elated beyond words to have the gracious presence of Dr. Binay Sahasrabuddhe, Honorable Chief Guest of the occasion. As we know, Dr. Binay Sahasrabuddhe is a nationalist social worker at heart, a researcher come student of political science and a trainer in democracy by profession and a former parliamentarian by elevation. Dr. Sahasrabuddhe is a postgraduate in English literature and a PhD in political science, both from the University of Mumbai. And since January 2018, Dr. Sahasrabuddhe is the President of Indian Council for Cultural Relations, and particularly the people of Odisha humbly recognize the contribution of Indian Council for Cultural Relations as the former regional head of ICCR, Madam Meenakshi Mishra, is here. And she has firmly stood by the artists of Odisha during the pandemic corona period. And we are extremely grateful to ICCR, particularly to Madam Meenakshi Mishra, and under the guidance of Dr. Binay Sahasrabuddhe, so many activities were conducted on the caption Horizons Reach. And Dr. Sahasrabuddhe has authored and edited over half a dozen books in Marathi and English, and couple of which have received distinguished awards. As a great social thinker ahead of time, as a philanthropist and as a great social activist and a great academician, Dr. Sahasrabuddhe has carved a niche for himself in the firmament of social science, in the firmament of social service as well. And with a big round of applause, we express our heartfelt gratitude to the chief guest of the occasion, Dr. Binay Sahasrabuddhe, who is going to address all of us.
Our guest of honor and a very good old friend of mine, Professor Dr. Shantishri Dhulipudi Pandit, Vice Chancellor of the Jawaharlal Nehru University. The guest of honor, Dr. Chonthorn Thoy, the Deputy Director General of the Institute of Culture and Fine Arts of the Royal Academy of Cambodia, whom we heard. Renowned academic historian, Professor Smriti Kumar Sarkar, former Vice Chancellor of the Burdwan University. Dr. Chandi Prasad Nanda, and of course, last but not the least, Professor Upendra Padhi, the chairman of this conference, on whose invitation, in fact, I am here, and all the ladies and gentlemen over here. आजी मन बहुत खुशी एथारे उपस्थिता थिबारू. जय जगन्नाथ. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, मुझे ऐसा लगा कि हम उड़ीसा के प्रभाव की चर्चा करते हैं, तो उड़ीसा का प्रभाव और भारत का प्रभाव ये तो कोई अलग तो है ही नहीं, एक ही है. तो कम से कम शुरू में मैं थोड़ा उड़ीसा की भाषा में भी एक वाक्य बोलने का प्रयास करूं, बाद में थोड़ा सा राष्ट्रभाषा में भी बोलूं, और फिर जिस भाषा में विदेश के लोग समझते हैं उस भाषा को भी उपयोग में लाऊं. मगर सबसे पहले तो मैं इस विश्वविद्यालय का अभिनंदन करूंगा कि उन्होंने इस विषय पर एक बहुत सारगर्भित चर्चा का आयोजन यहाँ किया. और जब मैं हिंदी में बोल रहा हूँ तब मुझे याद आ रहा है, डॉक्टर पंडित, आई मस्ट शेयर दिस विथ यू, जब हम ICCR के विभिन्न कामों के जरिए प्रवास करते हैं, तो आई हैड द ओकेजन ऑफ विजिटिंग मॉस्को, एंड यू नो इन रशिया Hindi is taught for last several decades, right from the Soviet era. तो जो हिंदी पढ़ाने वाले प्राध्यापक हैं उनको हम मिलते हैं जहाँ जहाँ भी जाते हैं. तो मॉस्को यूनिवर्सिटी में हिंदी पढ़ाने वाली एक 70 वर्षीय महिला ने मुझे कहा कि आप वापस जाइए तो हमारे धन्यवाद माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी को दीजिए, आपके प्रधानमंत्री जी को. तो मैंने कहा मैं जरूर दूंगा, मगर उसका कारण क्या है. तो उन्होंने कहा कि वो एक देश के अकेले प्रधानमंत्री है आपके देश के, जो यहाँ आकर भी हिंदी में बात करते हैं, जिसके कारण हिंदी से रशियन ट्रांसलेशन करने वालों को कोई काम मिल गया, नहीं तो उनको कोई पूछता ही नहीं था, सब अंग्रेजी की भाषा करते थे। तो कहने का मतलब है कि जब हम आज़ादी का अमृत महोत्सव मना रहे हैं तो स्वभाषा, स्वदेश, स्वभूषा, स्वधर्म, इन सभी के बारे में हमारे मन में एक स्वाभाविक सार्थक अभिमान होना बहुत जरूरी है, क्योंकि ये हमारी पहचान है। दिस इज आवर आइडेंटिटी। एंड देयर आर मेनी सोशल साइंटिस्ट्स ओवर हियर. I need not elaborate on this, but identity is not a artificial construct. It is something which provides you the raison d'être to live a meaningful life. In earlier days, social scientists and journalists especially used to describe cities like Mumbai and New York and Bhubaneswar and Kolkata as melting pot, where all your identities get melted into a different identity kind of. But today it is not considered a right term, and they use the term salad bowl, where you keep all your original identities intact and still become a part of a larger identity. And therefore, I believe we have to emphasize on greater usage of everything that is Indian, including language. और इसलिए मैंने सोचा कि मैं पहले थोड़ा सा उड़ीसा में आया हूँ तो उड़िया में बात करने की कोशिश करूँ और फिर हिंदी में भी बात करूँ। यहाँ पर जो चर्चा हो रही है, मुझे लगता है कि बहुत सारा विषय प्रोफेसर स्मृति कुमार जी ने भी रखा है, डॉक्टर पंडित ने भी उसको स्पर्श किया है, और हमारे कंबोडिया के जो मित्र यहाँ आए हैं उन्होंने भी उस पर प्रकाश डालने की कोशिश की है। बट आई वुड सर्टनली लाइक टू पिक अप फ्रॉम वेयर डॉक्टर पंडित हैज इन अ वे एंडेड हर स्पीच, दैट इन आवर इंटेलेक्चुअल डिस्कोर्स ऑल्सो वी हैव टू रिमेंबर दैट वी आर फ्रॉम इंडिया. We need not always come under the influence, needless influence, I would say, of the West or Eurocentric kind of thinking or the colonial dogma. She rightly pointed out that India is a civilizational state, not a nation state. And in the same vein, I would say that let us revisit the terms which are commonly used by the Westerners. For example, pluralism. I really wonder, इस शब्द के उपयोग की कोई जरूरत ही नहीं है. प्लूरलिज्म तो समाज दुनिया में है, विश्व में है, प्रकृति में है, तो प्लूरलिज्म तो होना ही, उसको वापस बुलाने की क्या जरूरत है. इंडिया इज द अदर नेम ऑफ प्लूरलिज्म. नोबडी नीड टू टीच अस अबाउट प्लूरलिज्म. वी आर ऑलवेज प्लूरल. द एंटायर यूनिवर्स इज प्लूरल. मगर बार बार ये थोपते रहते हैं इंडिजिनस. अगेन I really wonder, and I am happy, I must share here, that in 1995, the international community and the United Nations observed the year of the International Year of Indigenous People. And the UN wanted every other country to celebrate this year. I am happy that time our Prime Minister Narasimha Rao ji wrote to the United Nations saying that India is not going to observe this year because in India everybody is indigenous. That is true. हमारे यहाँ ये कोई भेद होता ही नहीं है. जो यहाँ आया यहाँ का हो गया. हम तो सबको भारत माता का पुत्र ही मानते हैं, पुत्र और कन्या. तो मैं मानता हूँ कि ये जो विदेश परस्त सोच है उससे जितने जल्दी, एंड आई नीड नॉट रिमाइंड ऑल ऑफ यू हियर सच ए एनलाइटेंड गैदरिंग दैट ऑनरेबल प्राइम मिनिस्टर लास्ट ईयर from the ramparts of the Red Fort, he made a passionate appeal to free ourselves from everything that is colonial. और मैं मानता हूं कि एकेडमिक्स में ये colonialism बहुत कुछ छाया हुआ है. उससे एकेडमिक्स की जितनी जल्दी हम मुक्तता करेंगे उतना इस देश की भलाई के लिए मैं मानता हूं कि अच्छा होगा. Coming to the subject, I would say that the influence of India and more particularly Kalinga all over the Southeast Asia. I mean, 2-3 facts are very clear, and I need not elaborately explain them. But the first important thing is that there are multiple dimensions of India's ancient global outreach. And the outreach of and from Kalinga forms a significant part of that. We cannot talk about, or we cannot perhaps ably grasp the expanse of India's influence and India's global outreach in ancient times without referring to Kalinga. And as I said, there were multiple dimensions. It was through epics, and I must say here that we have in Southeast Asia a very rich country called Brunei. Now, from where the word Brunei has come, etymologically, Brunei, and it is said in scholarly essays, that is derived from the Sanskrit word for the god of the seas, which is Varuna. The exchange of ideas, people, capital and goods, what they call globalization today, was present between India and Southeast Asia since time immemorial. And let me tell you how the influence continues even today. Indian Council for Cultural Relations organizes Ramayana Festival since 2015 every year. And many countries send their very colorful presentations. I mean, troops coming and presenting one story or one chapter of Ramayana or the other. And the most popular is that the Jatayu Vadha. Very interesting. Whether Sri Lanka, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, everybody wants to work on Jatayu Vadha. So once we sent an invitation to Brunei, and having sent that invitation, our office was a little perplexed because they thought we did a wrong thing, because Brunei, unlike Thailand and Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, is a country of 100% followers of Islam. So how can they send a troop for a Ramayana festival? But now the invitation was sent, so they waited, and the troop came, and they presented a wonderful skit based on Ramayana. And after their presentation, when we were having a discussion over a cup of tea, one of our officials very frankly told them that we were apprehensive whether you would send a troop or not, because you are a 100% Islamic country. The leader of that group told our official that, boss, you are making a mistake. We have changed our religion, not our culture. And that is the importance of Indian culture. It is so enduring. It doesn't matter which god you worship. Culture is the same. And that is why I need not give all those examples, how is the name of an airline, and how we see Samudra Manthana there at the Bangkok airport. And so many, I mean, so on and so forth. I mean, I need not elaborate on them. Everybody knows about it. It's a matter of common knowledge. So, the point I was trying to make was that while epics constituted one part of our influence, trade, agriculture, music, all these things, even dance forms for that matter, also had their own share of influence over the global community, more particularly the Southeast Asian community. And therefore, it was on the one hand cultural, on the other hand economic, at the same time political and diplomatic. But let me tell you that even while doing so, there was absolutely no attempt of any kind of imposition or flattening. Because as we say, and this I believe is the definition of India's approach towards what they call as secularism, which is ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti. The God is one, wise people describe it differently. Likewise, if you go through all the details of the kind of forms the Indian epics have taken in all these countries, for example, Fa Lak Fra Lam is the name of Ramayana in Laos. It is basically about the biography of Lakshmana and Rama. Hiyakat Seri Ram is what is being considered as Malaysian Ramayana. Ramakirti Ramakiyan, I am told it is in Cambodia. Am I correct, sir? So Ramakirti Ramakiyan is the Cambodian version of Ramayana. Kakavin Ramayana is in Java. Ramaken is in Thailand. Yamayan is in Myanmar. Sumanasantak is, basically it is about Kalidasa and mostly into Indonesia. And likewise, there are many examples which I can continue to give, which explains us as to how Ramayana and Mahabharata have impacted this entire region very deeply and very widely. In fact, I would suggest that it would be a good idea if the university, Kalinga University here, and even the JNU, with the help of ICCR, if we can constitute or float a new idea of Ramayana and Mahabharata countries. Because this is a new block of countries. If we really try to gauge the influence of these epics, I'm sure at least a dozens of countries we can certainly enlist. The point I'm trying to make was that culture did not influence the local situations in such a way that it could cause any kind of a flattening. Today what happens? That book we know, which is about the world is flat. And it talks about post-globalization flattening of the economic situation. Because level playing field was perhaps common to all, and therefore the columnist said that the world is flat. But unfortunately, due to excessive Americanization and westernization of the entire global community, we find that even in Beijing, we realize that we are perhaps in a Mandarin America. Or when you visit Tel Aviv, you realize that you are in a Hebrew America. You don't get that experience in Delhi, Mumbai or Kolkata because we have retained our identity. And therefore, our culture, even though it crossed boundaries and went to different shores in different countries, in different societies, it didn't influence them so much that it would cause any kind of a flattening. It allowed the flavor of the local, and still it became a part of the global, which is Indian definition of globalization, I would say. Lastly, I would also say that India's influence was never about military rule or making them kind of subordinate subjects of a particular kingdom. That was never the idea. In fact, and it is not for no reason that the deity that we all worship is Jagannatha. Natha is what? Natha is the guardian. So guardian of the whole world, whole universe for that matter. Not ruler. Ruler is a very small concept. Guardian is a very lofty ideal. And therefore we never went there to establish our rule. Even Rama handed over the kingdom of Ravana to Bibhishana and went back. It was not an extended part of the Ayodhya kingdom. Never. That was not the idea. So imperialism or establishing your rule through military might was never in the scheme of things of whatever originated from India. And therefore, when we look forward as to how do we deal with and take this message of Kalinga and Southeast Asia civilizational linkages forward, I have two suggestions to offer. Number one, and a renowned academic like Dr. Pandit and Professor Kar are here, I would say that the UGC and other bodies require to consider whether we now have to undertake some kind of new area studies which is Kalinga studies, Magadha studies, Ahom studies, Chola studies, Maratha studies, because without we studying all these kingdoms in India of the historic and ancient periods, we will not be able to grasp as to what exactly was the contribution of Indian rulers of those days. And therefore, it is required that we have a new area study definition wherein we consider all these things. And lastly, insofar as cultural ties and academic linkages are concerned, and there is abundant scope for that, I would suggest this university may also consider undertaking teaching of several Southeast Asian languages. Because language is the carrier, is the vehicle of culture. We don't have a single department where we teach a Singhali language. We don't have a single department where we teach Burmese or Khmer or Thai language. These are all our sister languages. And sisters have their right. And therefore we need to recognize them. We need to give them some space in our university system. And therefore my earnest request to the members of the academic committee to consider whether we can have these departments established and whether we can encourage our people to study these languages as well. Foreign language doesn't mean only Spanish, French, German, Russian, Mandarin, or Japanese. These languages are neighborhood languages, and it is high time we all pay adequate attention to them. Lastly, we started with Look East. And there our Prime Minister went a couple of steps further, and he said, Act East. And now we are moving speedily towards that. I would suggest that for academicians and those into the arenas of culture, we also require to move further and from Look East to Act East to Attract East. Let us attract more and more friends from Eastern world, from the Southeast Asia, not just as tourists of course it is important, but also as students coming over here, also as teachers coming over here, also as universities who have some linkages with establishments like the Kalanga University here. If we do that, I am sure this civilizational linkage between Kalinga and Southeast Asia will be taken to a different level. Thank you very much.
जावत् स्थास्यन्ति गिरयः सरितश्च महीतळे तावत् रामायणी कथा लोकेषु प्रचरिष्यति. That is how Maharshi Valmiki has rightly indicated, and Ramayana, the epic, and the enactment of different episodes from Ramayana in different Southeast Asian countries reflect our great link with those countries in the Southeast Asia, and that was rightly mentioned by our esteemed chief guest of the occasion, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe, esteemed President, Indian Council for Cultural Relations. We are extremely grateful to you, sir, for your scholarly and encouraging and motivating address and your benign presence as well. And now we are at the verge of completion of this inaugural ceremony, and I take the privilege to request Professor Patita Pavan Misra, the convener of the conference, to present his concluding remark. As you know, Professor Patita Pavan Misra was educated in Delhi University, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and at Rabindra Bharati University, and Professor's main area of research lies in history and culture in India, Southeast Asia, and international relations. After his retirement from Shambalpuri University, Odisha, as professor, now he also took up the assignment as a visiting professor at Northern University of Asia, and he is a senior academic fellow of the Indian Council of Historical Research, New Delhi. May I request you, sir, kindly present concluding address.
Jai Jagannath, Jai Sri Ram, and to follow the English version, good afternoon. President of the Indian Council of Social Sciences, Indian Council of Cultural Relations, esteemed Vice Chancellor of INU, then Professor Sarkar, Professor Nanda, then the main brain behind this conference, Professor Padi, then the London delegates who had done enough on Southeast Asia, my friends, my colleagues. Then I find some of my students also, like Dr. Yamin, Dr. Aparna Mukherjee, Dr. Palai, and Jayanti Dora, doctor, who is now heading the Department of History University as professor. So it's real pleasure to be among us, and I thank you very much, Professor, to give me this opportunity. Our predecessor, our speakers, talked gems and gems only. So whatever I will say will be a mere repetition. Dr. Nanda, in his usual style, gave an intellectual view. Then Dr. my friend for the last 30 years, gave an outstanding, and our Madam Vice Chancellor, she also did some new things. A history of feminism must be stressed on. All children, we worship, but in our heart of heart, we should respect the feminine form. Whether intellectuals or academics or politicians should take stringent measures, not in words but in action, against anybody violating a woman. Then we can be really feminist in words only. Then our president, I was really amazed by his erudition, his viewpoints, his emphasis on language took my memory back to years when I was a student of Delhi University. I took up Southeast Asia as a special paper. I am not telling his name. So why are you taking that paper? Take China. Now I took this paper and he gave me very low marks. And he became a famous so-called Marxist historian who very conveniently in modern omitted 1942 quit India and Communist Party's non-participation. That is the type of history we should change. That's what the Lowland delegates do. We know about Cholas in our students, but very few lines. About Om, only recently we were aware of it. That one, Rachid Barbukhan was there, who checked Mughal invasion for 17 times. And this is the area who will join India with South Asia, the Burmese area. They all belong to the Thai race, who migrated in 13th century from China. In Thailand, they are known as Thais. In Laos, then Cambodians, then in our northeastern. There is one contribution of Southeast Asian to India. The question was raised. Anyhow, Kalinga, our topic, it consists of a meeting point of North and South. That's why it's important from time immemorial. We had trade relations, we had cultural relations. In the proceedings of the seminar in coming days, you will find how the architectural similarities, then the ports of Odisha, then items of export, then the cultural flavor of Kalinga in Southeast Asia, the nomenclature clinging everywhere in Southeast Asia. All these point to a dynamic, vibrant relationship of Kalinga with Southeast Asia. The sad part is that only for the last 20-30 years we find an Indian recognition or a global recognition of Kalinga's contribution to Southeast Asia. Because I find many articles written on Burmese history, ancient history, 50-60 pages in good journal, but don't find Odisha's contribution. Very strange, because where is Tapas? Where is Balluk? Where is the architectural similarities of Sayan Pagoda with the Bhubaneswar temples?